Hello everyone and anyone unfortunate enough to have stumbled onto this video. I am Friliqui, the maker of this video here, the maker of this video here. Okay. And I will be talking about the curiously named game called Rogue Lords. Who are the Rogue Lords, you might ask? Well, they are a collection of some of the spookiest ghoulies you might or might not have ever heard of. There is the Count who needs no name or introduction, Count Chocula, that one doctor that Gene Wilder played, and his monster, a young lady who couldn't control her time of the month, a Wiccan, and the horseman who lacks a head. Also, there's the Hag Raven and a tease with wings. Innuendo aside, the first thing I'll state is that the characters in this game are aesthetically well done and maintain a consistent thematic scheme, but the creature, something about exposed brain doesn't sit well with me. Then again, I couldn't dissect a dead rat in school, so my tolerance level for exposed internal parts is pretty low. That is why I'm not a surgeon. That, and I'm pretty slow in the head. Moving on, Rogue Lords is a pretty straightforward game. You have a party of three, you move through an overworld map from one instance to another. Each instance is either a combat, narrative event, or some sort of auxiliary scenario where you gain some kind of benefit like an improved or additional skill for the members of your active party. The basics of the game were pretty easy to get down, but as you progress through it, it is designed to get increasingly more difficult. And as it does, more than the basics are required to both enjoy and complete it. I say this because this game will allow you to get through a good portion of the campaign, called books, only to place an essentially insurmountable wall in front of your progress. Now, to be fair, this could be entirely because of the way I was using each character's skills, but then that returns me to my initial comment about not being able to enjoy this game or complete it without mastering more than the basics of the game. To actually complete the game, I had to go through what are essentially the same events and combat scenarios in different order each time I started a campaign over. I wish I could say that there are enough events and combat scenarios that the repetition isn't noticeable, but it is very noticeable, particularly when you have to repeat the campaign because you built your team in a way that won't allow you to get through a specific combat scenario. This happened a lot early on to me, but I will admit that as I started realizing how the different characters worked in concert with each other, the repetition was still noticeable. I was simply having an easier time defeating the same combination of enemies. The repetition can be summed up as follows: get through the first campaign or book, and you will find that all other subsequent campaigns have the same elements and scenarios, simply in different order. This helps you plan for each campaign as you know what you will face, so that you won't so that you won't just breeze through the game so easily, the developers started a good idea to bump up the difficulty of each campaign. How might you ask? Mostly by making the enemies progressively stronger. New enemies? No. Same enemies but progressively more powerful with increased damage and health points? Yes. This is not applied to the big boss of each book, and big boss is simply what I am calling the boss at the end of each book. Each book, each big boss is unique to the book you encounter them in, but I didn't find that each one presented all that unique of a challenge. In short, so long as your party members are sufficiently strong enough, meaning that they have an adequate amount of damage dealing debuffs and buff powers, you'll be able to take down each big boss. I suppose the catch here is the randomizing of powers. You are unlikely to be able to build the same way from one book to another, which meant that at least when I played through it, I had to improvise or more appropriately adjust to what the I was getting in the book in terms of skills and relics. Which did make me engage with each book much more than if I was simply able to go for the same build from one book to the next. However, engaging elements like what I just mentioned is something that this game could use much more of. For example, I disengaged with the general narratives of each book because they were simply, well, too repetitive. Even the specific narrative elements in each book, which is supposed to be the narrative build up to the big boss fights, were little more than stepping stones to the instances that offered something of tactical value. The specific narrative elements in each book, though, do provide some respite from the other general repetitive elements, but and this holds most relevant early on when I was figuring things out. I found myself skipping them after a playthrough as they too become, like I said, repetitive, kind of a theme here, and you gain nothing from hearing them more than one time, if you remember what it said the first time. They don't provide any real insight into how to defeat a big boss. They are there simply to give you the impression that you're not treading over the same instances as you as you went through in your last playthrough or in the last book. Rogue Lords is just one of those games where you have to enjoy the core gameplay cycle because the repetition does start to get tiresome. Fortunately, the game does provide enough variety in the skills available to your party members that optimizing the different combinations that can make up a party stays interesting even as you go through the same randomized events and combat instances just in different order. Now, if you're hoping for some sort of character development or a unique story for each character available, you will be sorely disappointed. There is nothing in terms of unique gameplay to each character other than the skills available to them. Oh, there are narrative instances where depending on which character you use, you might be able to say you might be able to get that character to say something differently than another character, but you'll get nothing more than a unique line or two. And it's not really spoken, it's just kind of spelled out. Now, before I wrap it up, I'll spin a bit more of a positive tune here. The first is the aesthetics. I like the way the game world looks. Haunting, creepy, spooky, somewhat Victorian are all appropriate descriptors for the game world, which is a positive in my book. And as stated earlier, the character design is solid. I also enjoyed that when you died, you gained experience, which as you leveled unlocked different items and powers for your characters. I did not encounter any technical difficulties that prevented me from getting through the game, so that's always a positive. Although there was one annoying issue that happened after giving up on a campaign and starting a new one where the game simply froze. A quick restart fixed the issue, but it was an issue. Positives, though. We're focusing on positives here, so I'll stay positive. I suppose the sense of satisfaction you get from getting through some of the more difficult combat scenarios is a positive. Sure, that's a positive. One final complaint about the game design. I know it was supposed to be positive, but let's go with constructive criticism here. The whole saving after you take an action is annoying. There were times where I accidentally made a move in one direction or accidentally traded my souls to the Grim Reaper to acquire a new power. I get the idea behind it. The developers want to make sure that the player is aware and engaged with the game so that slip ups don't happen, and they want choices to weigh on the player. But it really just gets annoying when a simple misclick ruins the build you had going, or you go down the wrong path because you're only half paying attention because the repetition of the game has made you disengage from what is going on until you get to some combat scenario or some choice you have to make. Might I suggest that here's the constructive part? Might I suggest a redo button that takes you back one or maybe two turns? Of course, this would make the game much less difficult and significantly cut down on the amount of time it takes to finish the game. At least it would have for me. So I don't want to say that developers wouldn't be inclined to including something like this, but it seems like their response would be, well, you have to pay attention to what you're doing. Well, my response is you have to make a less dull game. All right, I've gone on long enough, and I'll wrap it up by saying that this game tries to spread out the limited content that it has, but doesn't succeed at hiding the limited content that it does have. I bought the game on sale for $15, and for $15, it is worth a try if you're looking for a game that combines elements of visual novels, turn based strategy, and RPGs in a somewhat entertaining fashion that does diminish the more you play the game. On my not entirely arbitrary scale, where 0 is garbage fire and 5 is a must play for anyone that enjoys video games, Rogue Lord falls at a 2.5. It's not a bad game, but the shortcomings are glaring. Most prominently, at least for me, it's the repetition. I can handle and enjoy a challenging game, but when the challenge is defeating what are essentially the same enemies in the same scenarios, with the only difference being your combination of powers and a slight increase to the damage and health of the enemies you're facing, it gets dull. It's a good thing that the game is not very long, as any increase in length would have only made the dullness that much more apparent. Well, anyway, that does it for this video. Till next time.